now. You can use it to make websites. You can use it to make apps. You can use it for Android, iOS. A lot of things are powered by React actually. And I'll cover what makes React special. And after explaining why you should go learn React, I will go through some basic syntax and just explaining at a basic level how everything works. That's where I hope to cover some of your introductory questions, though I can't promise you that I'll get to everything, so my apologies. Unfortunately, because of time, I can't cover JavaScript basics. But after a few breaks, we'll get into the two most useful functions that you need in React. And that's where you really need to understand just the concept. I won't make you memorize code. I really want you to understand the concept. And if we don't have too many questions, I will work through outlining a project that we're making, which is going to be a improv presentations app, basically a kind of game that I will pull up a link to. And the game lets you pull out images from across the internet. You get like a topic, say, popular movies, and a random image that you have to do an improv presentation with, like popular movies with lavender. So we'll get into that later if we don't have too many questions. But to start with, I wanted to give you a few useful links. The first link is I need you to have a Code Sandbox account. If you don't have a Code Sandbox account, let me know. If you do have a Code Sandbox account, go to Code Sandbox and click fork. I'm going to send this link in the chat. Click fork on it. Over here, this button, we will be using it later. And Jenny, do we have any people who don't have a Code Sandbox account?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a few people.
All right, so if you do have a Code Sandbox account, open the link, click fork. We'll be using this throughout. I'll explain what Code Sandbox is in a second. If you don't have a Code Sandbox account, then go to codesandbox.io, code sandbox, 3 words, .io, and you can sign in with Google, and you can have you'll have an account. So hopefully you do that and then still just click on the same link. Click sign in with Google and just open the link in the chat. We'll be using this throughout. So while you're doing that, I'm going to quickly explain what React is and why it's special with an example of YouTube, actually. So if you look at this page right now, hopefully you have some experience with web development. And if I use a word like div or like a paragraph tag, you should understand what I'm saying. But if you look at this YouTube page, there's a lot of repetition on here. So let's say you're looking at any one tile, any one video tile. It's usually the same thing. Like you just have an image, you have a title, you have the channel logo, and then a few descriptions. And then, again, same thing, again, same thing. And it would be really painful to go in the HTML. I can click inspect element, right click and inspect element to see the HTML. And it would be really painful to, let's say, go through each video on here and then manually code it. Put in an image, then the next image, then the next image, and just like keep doing that again and again. So what React does is, this is the core feature of React. It creates what are called components. Components are basically pieces of reusable code. So I might say that each component that I have, each idea, each video tile component that I have, it's going to have an image, it's going to have a title, a channel logo, and a description. And then I don't need to create, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a lot of videos by hand. I can just create one component. So that is the core concept of React. You create components to reuse code. Does that sound good? Any questions so far?
Could you please repeat that? I just entered, sorry.
Sure. So
Thank you.
the core concept of React is that you don't want to reuse the same code over and over again. You don't want to create an HTML image tag 9 billion times across a page. Instead, you just want to create one template, basically. This template is called a component. And what a component does is it allows you to just say, in general, in any video tag I have, I'm going to have an image, a channel logo, and a title and a description. And then you can reuse that code again and again. Sound good? All right. So, Jenny, I'm good to go?
Yep, no questions.
Okay. So that is the core concept of React, to have those components. And the thing that React does really well is it allows you to work with JavaScript while it, in the background, creates all the HTML boring details that you need to make software like YouTube, like a Amazon website. And the core concept that you really need to know is you are in charge of components. So you have to tell React, okay, in my component, I want an image, I want a title, I want a description, while React will take care of the data. What I mean by the data is the data that tells you which image do I want here, which words do I want in the title, etc. So you take care of components, you build components in React. That's your job as a developer. And in the background, React is messing about all the data and putting it in the right places so that you can get the website that you have. So with that out of the way, I'm going to move on to explaining some of the basics of how React syntax works. And after we understand some of the syntax, then we can get started actually working with some functions within React. So I'm going to open up the code sandbox file here that I shared in the chat. If you're new joining, just scroll up in the chat until you can see this. Um, hopefully everyone has access to it and you can, Jenny, am I cutting out a little bit?
No, everything is fine right now.
Okay, sound good. So hopefully you have access to it and you have forked it over here. I want you to just do a quick check. Everyone good? Are we good to start with the coding bits, the tutorial?
Yep.
Okay, so we are going to go over all the files in this project. I know, random thing here, you don't completely understand what it does right now. But for now, just go to the Playground JS file. It's an empty file where I'm just going to explain React syntax. So React has its own syntax. It has its own language, actually. The language is called JSX. JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript XML. What's that? Well, XML is extensible markup language. What it basically means is, like any markup language, a special format so that you can give computers instructions. So XML is actually very similar to, let's say, HTML. Um, you can have like body tags and style tags and other tags to specify what's on a website, what's on a web page. And what JSX is it's a mix, basically, of both JavaScript and markup languages like HTML. And I'm going to show you what that means. So whenever you have a JSX file, here, I could call this playground.jsx. Over here, this pencil icon that pops up, it just lets you rename the file. And you can see that's the React logo that just pops up because that's React special language. In a JSX file, I can do any JavaScript thing and any HTML thing. So let's say I just did console.log hi, I can do that in a JSX file. It's regular JavaScript, works fine. If I do, there's a var named cat, and it's equal to Tiddles. That's my cat's name. That's fine. It's JavaScript. I can even do like for loops and stuff. So for var I equals 0, going up to 10, you can do I++ and console.log I. All this works. Any JavaScript you want to put in here, that's fine. JSX is just a mix of JavaScript and HTML. However, there's one special thing if you come from JavaScript land that you're not going to be used to with JSX, and that is the mixture of JSX when it comes to HTML. So if you're used to JavaScript, you've seen things like var num equals 1. Yeah, sure, you can assign a variable that is equal to the number 1. But here's a special thing. You can also store HTML as variables. So I could store in num, I could store a div that inside it says, hi, this is weird, like this. That's also perfectly fine. I just stored HTML as a JavaScript variable. That's kind of what JSX lets you do. That's the special thing with React. It lets you connect both JavaScript and HTML in this way so that you can really mix them in code. So you could have a variable that stores HTML. You could have a function that returns HTML. And that is like the special thing you need to know. The only difference between JavaScript syntax and JSX. Anyone have any questions so far?
Someone asked, how do we get to the Playground.jsx part?
Sure. So I'm assuming you're on Code Sandbox here. There's a URL in the chat. If you scroll all the way up, I know, long way to scroll. If you go to that sandbox and click fork, you'll get your own little coding environment. And over on the left-hand side, you'll see a bunch of files. On the default, you should be on this app.js file. If you click on playground.js or playground.jsx, I just renamed my file with this pencil icon, then you should be able to get to this playground file. Sound good? Another thing I wanted to explain, why are we using Code Sandbox? What is Code Sandbox? Code Sandbox is really cool. I'd highly recommend it for beginners. What it does is it takes care of JavaScript packages. So on the bottom, you see this panel called dependencies, and you have these fancy words like React and React DOM and all that. I'll explain what that is in just a second. But what Code Sandbox does is it basically takes care of downloading things off of the internet, almost like libraries, you can call them if you're used to other programming languages. And you can click in one click and add React. Otherwise, if you had to download React on your computer, trust me, it's a half-hour process. So highly recommend Code Sandbox. It takes care of everything for you. Jenny, I'm sorry. Are we good to move on?
Someone also asked, I'm new to Code Sandbox and I don't see the button in the top right corner.
It's a little bit hard for me to diagnose that. Make sure that you have a Code Sandbox account. So when you go to codesandbox.io, codesandbox.io, if you don't see your dashboard like I do, then that means you don't have an account. You'll see like a login button on the top right. So try signing up. Um, if you can't follow along, that's fine too. You can see what we're doing. But those are the basics of React syntax. Good to move on?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So I'm now going to explain what is going on in this messy file. I'll walk you through it step by step. So over here on the right, you have this panel that is actually just showing an HTML document. Just like you visit google.com and it shows you some HTML for this website. This is also just HTML. And this particular HTML is index.html file right here. You can see just regular HTML. And this file has something special in it. It has this div right here that has an ID of root. What React does behind the hood is it takes any JavaScript instructions that you send it, and it basically puts all the stuff that you want for you inside this div called root. So right now, it's taking this hello world paragraph element, and React is automatically inserting it into div with ID of root. So what you're seeing right now, in the end, is just HTML. React is just taking care of turning your JavaScript code into HTML. Sorry, someone's mic is on. Do you have a question? All right. So React turns JavaScript into HTML, and it's putting all of the stuff you want inside this div, ID of root. How does it do that? That's a good question. So you have this index.html file with the stuff that you see here. The way that React is putting stuff into the index.html file is it has a special, you can think of this as like React special toolkit. You don't need to know how it works. It's just the tools that React gives you. It's called React DOM. Again, another JavaScript package that Code Sandbox downloaded for us. And React DOM, as it says in the contents, turns JavaScript into HTML. So if you've seen this syntax, this is from like regular JavaScript on the web. This document word, it just means the HTML document. So it's selecting the HTML document you saw right here. And inside the document, it's searching for an element with the ID of root. And that's this div right here. So what React DOM does in this index.js file is it is selecting that root element, and it has this special render method, just like you render video, just like you render code, where it inserts whatever we want inside the root element. Now, this is going to look weird to you. This app thing. What is this app thing? You can see we're importing app from this file, /app.js. /, by the way, it just means in the same directory, in the same level, we'll find a file called app.js. So in this level, we have this file called app.js, and I will explain to you what it is doing. But what you need to understand for the index.js file is that React has its own built-in tools to turn JavaScript into HTML. It is selecting this index.html document, and specifically the div with an ID of root in it, and it is putting stuff inside of it. It is rendering the unique JavaScript that we want inside of this root HTML. It's like React DOM is the translator, turn JavaScript into HTML. Does that part sound good before I dive into what is going on in this mysterious app.js file? I'm also going to get some water. If you have any questions, type it in the chat. All right, so let's move on to the main stuff. All this other stuff is what React is taking care of us with. If you ever create a React project, this will already be configured for you. I just wanted you to understand it's not magic that you're seeing here. It's just React translating JavaScript into HTML. So what is this thing that is going on in app.js? I want to highlight the importance of this line. So whenever you're using JSX, remember that's the React syntax, that's the React language. That's the reason why we have HTML and JavaScript in the same document. You need to import React. So this line, it lets us use JSX. So I'm going to break down line by line what's going on in this file. So when we import React from this package that we downloaded, React, it lets us use JSX. That's the reason why we can have both HTML and JavaScript inside the same file. Take a look what happens if I delete this. Eh? If this re-renders, there will be some error that you have somewhere around here. But that's one of the most common mistakes that you will have, forgetting to import React. So remember, if you ever want to use JavaScript and HTML at the same time, import React from React. That's the first bit, that's the first common error that I'll walk you through. Let's make a list. Common errors. Common errors. Forget to import React, can't use JSX. So that's the first thing, letting us use JSX in this file. Next thing, what is this whole like function business? Sure.
Oh, sorry. You said that if you forget to import React, we can use the JSX. So is it safe to say, like, for example, I'm using a Microsoft Visual Studio, should I always have an app.js besides the index.js, or could that be constructed in the latter part of the coding process?
Yeah, usually if you are using VS Code there, it will create a template app where it already creates app.js and index.js for you. I'll walk you through creating some more files here. That's going to be our first exercise where you can play around with it, not importing React versus importing React.
Okay, so it's automatic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
No worries. So let's move on to this next thing. So what is this weird business over here? Like, that's a lot of stuff. Let's actually, I'm just gonna tab over a bunch so you can't see that. Never mind the complicated stuff over there. I'll explain it to you from step by step. So here's the first thing you need to know. Remember those components that I showed you on the YouTube screen where I was like, okay, React lets you define components so that you can say, okay, this component has an image, a title, and a channel logo. The way you do that is basically by using JavaScript to specify, hey, in this component, I want exactly these HTML elements. And what you actually do, and I'm going to write this down for you, listen carefully. Any component in React component, is basically just a function that returns HTML. I'll say it again. Any component in React is basically just a function that returns HTML. Now think about that. In JavaScript, if you have a function, then you can, do stuff that you want. So let's say you have a, don't worry about this right now. Let's say you have like a sum function that, takes in X and Y, and it returns X plus Y, yeah? So in JavaScript, a function is a way for you to tell the computer, I have this input, I want you to return this output. And that's kind of what a React component is doing, except the output is HTML. So you're saying, computer, I want you to have my component, spelled right, and I want this component to have a certain set of HTML that it returns. So I could maybe return like a paragraph. So this is a return statement. This is the core concept. A component in React is a function that returns HTML. So the way that you tell React in my videos, how components, I want an image, I want a title, etc., is by doing this. Create a JavaScript function and then make it return HTML. React will use that to figure out, okay, so that's what he wants in this component. Does that idea sound good? Anyone have any questions?
There was a question earlier. What is
Sure.
the importance of combining JavaScript and HTML together?
Yeah, great question. If you've worked with if you worked with web development before, you know how tedious it can be to do things like I'm doing here. Oh, document.get element by ID, do this, do that. You're basically like spending the entire time working with lots of weird syntax and lots of weird functions to do very specific things. If you have JavaScript, you can make your life a lot easier. If you were, say, just making the YouTube page again with HTML, you would have to go and for each video here, each video tile, you would have to put in an image tag and then a title tag and then like a description tag and then repeat and repeat and repeat. And that's like 4, 8, 12, 16, like so many images. How are you going to do that? So with JavaScript, we can make our lives a lot easier instead of manually being like, okay, image source equals da 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 da. We can instead use JavaScript to automate all that. Does that help? Does that sound good?
Yep.
All right. So here's the key concept again. Components equals function that returns HTML. JavaScript function returns HTML. That's what a React component is. So if it helps you, you can like keep this here, but make sure you comment this in somewhere. A React component equals a function that returns HTML. Let me explain to you why this component above looks a little bit more messy. Let's comment that here. Component equals function that returns HTML. This is still just like a function. It's a function that returns HTML. Oh, wait, I know what that is. That's a component. So this is a React component right here, function that returns HTML. It just has these two keywords, export default, before it, because as you can see over here in index.js, we're actually going and getting this component. We're going to this file, app.js, and we're looking for something named app. And if we're going to import it from app, then it needs to be available. So that's why these two keywords in JavaScript, they let us export the components. I won't cover any more of JavaScript imports and exports, but hopefully that helps you a little bit. These are just keywords in JavaScript that let us export a component from one file to the next. So anyone have any questions? All right. So that is basically it. We have covered React syntax. So React, again, summary, uses JSX, special language, which is JavaScript plus HTML. The reason it can do that is because it has special magic in this package right here, So we always need to make sure to import React from React if we want to use JSX. And the way that React works is making reusable components. Components are just functions that return HTML. Functions just like this, and they return HTML. And we just have these two special keywords that let us export from one file to another. Now, I want you to try modifying your file. Put in your name. Hi, my name is, again, we're just modifying a paragraph. My name is Madhav. You can see the text just changed on here. You can say it is 5:55 p.m. in Canada. That's another thing you can do. Again, the text changed here. And you don't just need to have paragraphs. Again, you can just customize to whatever you want. So let's say I said, I want to have an H3 that has, you know, I want to have a title before I tell you the time. So I can say H3, again, hey, look, it's telling me unterminated JSX content. That's a good error to include. Unterminated JSX content just means you forgot to close the P tag. So these are good things to note. This is the language you need to understand while you're debugging. You'll spend a lot of hours debugging. You forgot to close a tag. Anyways, the time is, now I've closed the tag, H3. Oh, that's a little bit small. Let's make an H1. You can see I can just do whatever I want. I can create a lot of customizability within the HTML that I return. So that's how you could do something like make, you know, one of those YouTube video tiles. So I'm actually going to do something right now. I'm going to show you how complex this can get. So let's say I have this time, okay? Let's say I have this time. So I'm going to put this inside its own div, like this. And I'm going to put time inside this div. So that's going to be the time div. And I want to have like a greeting div. So I'm going to say like another div right here. I'm going to put in, hi, my name is Madhav. H1, and I'm going to put in an image of me. Let's see. Let's find an image of me. Self-promotion. Anyways, copy image link. Here's an image, src source. And I need to close this. This is a self-closing tag. Notice that syntax. You should know that from HTML. So you can see like this page is getting cluttered, you know, the time is this, you have like my name, you have an image of me, like there's so many things on this page. And you can see the code is getting hard to read too. So this is a core principle of React. When things get complicated, break it down. I'm gonna write that down. When things get complicated, break it down. So here's what I'm gonna do, okay? I wanna give some time information and I wanna give some information about me, but this is getting kind of messy. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna break down this component equals function that returns HTML, into more functions that return HTML. I'm gonna break it down into more components. So let's say I have a function that's called time, and it returns all of this time business here. So this time div, I'm gonna copy that from here and just scoop that in here. Yay. Here's a special thing I can do, okay? Special thing, get ready. In React, you can basically create any HTML tag, any custom HTML tag you want. Because the way that I would access this time component now, the way that I would access it is just to say, oh, that's inside the introduction. It's just to say time. It's like a self-closing tag. Hey, look, it went and found a function named time, and then it took the HTML being returned here and it put that into here. And again, this notation, it's just like HTML self-closing tags, like the break tag. You see now I have a space. I hope that is clear. So that's the first thing. I'm also gonna do this again. So I don't want, you know, such a big cluttered function. So I'm gonna break it down into subcomponents like this. I'll make it function. This is my introduction component. Component again. I don't know how many times I'm gonna say this, but one more time. Component equals function that returns HTML. So now I have an introduction component that I can also put in here. Hey, there we go. So let's just scoop these out of existence. Hey, look, my code is so much cleaner now, and it's easier to understand. Okay, I have time here, introduction here. Pretty cool, right? Does anyone have any questions so far? If you're unlucky, you'll already have run into the most common error. So let's say you accidentally deleted this body thing and this div. now you're gonna have this weird thing pop up, this horrible error that so many people have had. What this basically says is that you can't have more than one, basically more than one element being returned from a single function. So when I had the div tags around it, that was fine because I was just returning one div, and inside that there's multiple things, but React isn't that smart. It doesn't know, it doesn't care. But let's say I tried to return two things here. They don't just have to be components. I could just have like a paragraph here. This is text. If I do that, then you'll run into this error. So let me also define that error. Don't return multiple things. Don't return multiple things from one function. That's a good list of errors we have. Hopefully by the end you can remember all these. So make sure you import React, make sure you have, make sure you close your HTML tags and your JSX tags with this self-closing notation, and make sure you don't return multiple things from one function. Anyone have any questions? I'll stop here for just a sec.
Someone asked if you could explain more about the time function.
Sure. So when I use this syntax in React, because this isn't a standard HTML tag, like a P tag is a standard tag like this, you can see they're even highlighted different colors. What React does is it says, okay, this must be like some custom HTML tag that is implemented, and a custom HTML tag, again, just a component. So because a component is just a function that returns HTML for the, I don't know how many time, because a component is just a function, then React knows, okay, if I have a time tag here, that means I'm searching for a time function somewhere. And when it finds that function, it just goes and takes the HTML that the function is returning, and it's kind of like it teleports this code from here to here. And now you can see our code is much cleaner than having like all of that in one place. Does that help?
Yep,
Anything else? Any other questions?
that was all.
Okay, so here is the last thing. We have these functions, and I just scooted them out of existence. Unfortunately, you can't do that in real life. You can't just scoot your problems out of existence. So what we have to do is I accidentally deleted a curly brace here. Oh, by the way, unexpected token. Another error to note. That means you probably forgot to close a parentheses or a curly brace. Let's also note that down. You're going to spend hours debugging, I promise you. Make sure to remember. Wait, what was the error called? Unexpected token. You forgot to close something. Unexpected token equals you forgot to close curly brace or parenthesis. I'll just type in the symbols. This one, or this one, or this one. You forgot to do some of that. All right. So anyways, we can't scoot our problems out to existence, so we have to do a special thing. Just like we're taking this React component, app component that has its own subcomponents, just like we're exporting this from one file to another, we're actually going to do the same thing. That's what this components folder is for. I have a bunch of files here. I'm just going to delete them because I want to show you how to make them from scratch. So X to delete. I'm going to create another file, and I'm going to call this time.js. That's a React convention. You just name a React component with a capital letter, and then the file just gets the same name, .js. Here, I'm just going to take what I had, this function, and here's the thing, make sure you import React. Import React from React, otherwise you can't use JSX here. And then I have this function. I'm going to make sure, second thing, add the export, otherwise you're not going to be able to access the function. here's an error. Make sure you export the function. All right, so I exported the function from here, and I am going to now import the same function. So import, I'm going to import the time component from, I hope you're familiar with file paths. Here's the basics if you're not. So / means same directory. Directory just means like which folder are we within. So we're within the source folder. So / means go and search stuff within the source folder. So if you can see, I type / and it shows me Playground because that's within the source folder. I have index, I have styles.css, and I have this other components folder. That's actually what we want to enter because the file is in the components folder right here. So / source folder / components folder, and then another / time.js. So basically go to source, then to components, then to time. We type in time.js, import time from time.js. Here's the second thing. So we have time, that's one variable, but we both have like, oh, time is equal to this thing we're importing from this file, and time is equal to this function. So that's why it's complaining here. Don't do that. Use different names. Don't name everything the same thing. That's another thing. So I'm just going to delete this function that's called time because we're, again, just importing the same thing from this other file. So that's one thing, time.js. I made sure to import React from React. I put in the function that returns HTML, just a component, made sure to export it, then import it back into our file. I'm going to not do the same thing. I want you to figure out. So I just showed you how to do that for the time components. I want you to figure out how do I take this introduction component, put it inside its own file, and then import it back to use within the app components. I'll give you 2-3 minutes to do that, and I'm gonna get some water in the meantime. If you have any questions, I can open this up right now. Reason why all the function names are capitalized, it's just a convention. They don't have to be. It's just a unwritten rule, I guess, in React. You just do that out of habit. Anything else? Is the translation necessary? No, so that's the core thing that React does. It needs to translate JavaScript into HTML. I'm sorry to hear that you're lost, Davina. I know it can be complicated. I wish I had time to explain all the basics. I have a React hack pack, which Jenny can send the link to. At the bottom of it, there are resources that explain right from the basics. I made sure to include one of those. That might be useful for you. And thank you, Alexis, for helping out. Index.js, sure. Anything particular you want to see? Or just explain it again? React DOM, special magical package over here. Code Sandbox got it for us. It translates the JavaScript into HTML. We're importing the app component equals just a function, from this app.js file, and then inserting it into that div in index.html called root. So all the images, all the paragraph elements, all the headers, they all just go within this component. And here's the special function, React render puts this thing that we imported, app, into this root element. Hopefully that helps. All right, so hopefully you were able to get that function component, the introduction component, into another file. Can you drop in the chat? Were you able to do it? I'm gonna walk you through the solution if you weren't. So I'm just gonna scoot this off of this page, create a new introduction.js page. Make sure to import React from React. Make sure that you have a function that returns HTML. That's what a component is. And make sure that you export this function using the special JavaScript keywords, the magic words, because otherwise you won't be able to, and here you say introduction is not defined because there is no function right now in the file called introduction. Let's change that. Import introduction from /components/introduction. Hey, there we go. We are good. Sound good, everyone? Do we have any issues? Anyone struggling? Do you understand that? So this is all just basic JavaScript syntax. But I hope you see already, like, let's say you had a complicated website. You don't have to have, let me show you my website, which I did not make with React. I unfortunately made it with regular HTML. If I pulled up the HTML for this site, there is like so much stuff here. Like all of this I had to program myself. Like if you click into any one of these, more divs, more divs, more divs, there's so much stuff. So that's why React is nice. You can break down your code much more easily. So that's one benefit we have already. I'm now going to show you the main benefit, which is what happens when you only have to worry about the JavaScript and React can sort out all the rest. So here's what I'm going to show you in the time component. So it says it's 5:55 p.m. in Canada. What time is it? 5:53. I wasn't accurate. So the time is not correct anymore. How are we going to change that? It would be really, really weird if we pulled up our website and tried to edit what the time is every second, you know? Oh, now it is this minute, now it is that minute. That would be really odd for developers to do. And if you log into sites like Amazon or Google or something, like even if I open up a new browser page, you can see, oh, it's showing the temperature. Sometimes it'll show you the time. Like there's no way they're hiring developers to go change the time every minute when it changes. So the thing that we can do here is use JavaScript. JavaScript can automate things. I see some comments piling up. Anyone have any questions before or?
It was just about the recording, so not related to this.
Okay, so in JavaScript, I can keep the time up to date whenever I want. The way I do that is, let's say I create a variable time. It's going to be equal to a new date. This is just under JavaScript. I'm going to convert it to, let's convert it to a date string. So here, if I print, sorry, that's Python, oops. If I console.log time, you can see this JavaScript time, if you open up the console, it's going to be in the bottom left over here. You can see this is correct. I want to time string actually. I don't want the date. I know what the date is. Let's have it reload. Hey, look, 17:55:37. Yeah, whatever. Let's reload again. Hey, it changed, 17:55:45. You can reload again and it'll change. So here's a special thing. Here's a nifty thing. This is what React lets you do. It lets you, again, integrate JavaScript and HTML. So let's just take this out and I'm going to put in the time is over here. And here's a special thing, okay? If you've ever worked with JavaScript, I know not all of you are familiar. There's this thing you can do called string interpolation, which is when you can just put JavaScript variables inside a string. Here's how it looks. Var string equals, I'm gonna have these backticks, special backtick symbols. Don't worry, you don't need to use them. You can say the time is regular string text, and then a special syntax, $, and these curly brackets. And I can put in any variable I want inside. Okay, so don't worry if this went over to your head. Basically, you can put JavaScript variables and blend them inside regular strings. So similar to those curly brackets you just saw, or maybe didn't understand, you can put in curly brackets right here too. So I could put in curly brackets, which is a special React symbol that says, hey, when I put in like time here, you just output that string to the screen, time. But if I surround it with square brackets, no curly brackets, if I do that, then go look for a variable, a JavaScript variable named time, and then put that in. Try it out. You just put in time. You see just the string time. But if you surround it with curly brackets, now it's going and fetching the JavaScript and putting it onto the page. So this is how you can get really fancy. So let's say like you were on YouTube and you wanted to greet a special user, like a certain user. You could have, let's delete this. Let's say we're greeting a user, so we want some hi name. We don't know what their name is. H1. We could make a variable. So var name equals something. We can maybe fetch the name from like a database that we have. We can fetch it from an API, special word that I mentioned earlier. And if I surround this, now it like will update. So let's say someone logs out, another person logs in, we can say, okay, now it's Jenny. And that is a really powerful feature of React. Does everyone understand this feature? Because after this, we're going to get into the actual complicated stuff. This is the memorizing code part. Someone said, do you have to memorize code? This much code you have to memorize. After this, just don't worry about memorizing. Just remember the logic of how things work.
Someone asked if you could demonstrate the var string line again.
Sure. Don't worry about understanding this. This is just a JavaScript feature. If you want to search it up later, it's called string interpolation. Standard JavaScript. How it works is you can have any string, so let's call it str. You have these backtick looking thingies. These backtick characters are usually located under your escape key, and you can combine string with the time is within. You can combine string with JavaScript variables. The time is time. Any JavaScript variable, you have this special syntax, $ and curly braces. But in React, it's even simpler. You don't need any special backticks. You just need curly braces and then put in the time in the middle. Does that sound good? Hopefully.
And another question. And we always have to use those specific backticks in JavaScript.
In JavaScript, yeah. In React, you just need these curly braces. If you need to locate curly braces, on my keyboard, they're right above the Enter key. Yeah, right above the Enter key. So you need these special curly braces. That's what you use in for loops anyways. So that is basically React syntax. Now, there are just two powerful things that we need to know. Basically two big functions in React. Okay, only two. You only need to know two functions in React to do 90% of the things you ever will, plus this basic syntax about how component equals function that returns HTML. Yeah, again. So there are two special functions that the React package has. With these two functions, and then the rest of the things you learn, that's all the stuff you'll ever need to know to do 90% of the things you want. So would you like to take a break or grab a drink or just power through it and just go through the two functions? No decisions, I guess we're powering through. All right, so two special functions in React, what are they? Master them one at a time. Here's something I'll demonstrate to you. Here's an odd detail. So whenever I made any changes, okay, whenever I made any changes to this file, Code Sandbox automatically starts like re-rendering things. It doesn't wait for me to save, it just re-renders. So I'm gonna make a change. Watch what happens to the console over here. Hey, something new popped up. Okay, back. Something new popped up. Okay, last time. Something new popped up. What is going on? Here's what's going on. Remember what I said earlier? You are in charge of the components. React is in charge of the data. What React is doing behind the scenes without you even knowing is it is constantly tracking what should and should not be on the screen. It is constantly tracking, hey, that name of the person, like the user who signed in, is it still Jenny? Maybe it's Madhav. Let me keep checking. And as soon as I change it to Madhav, React is automatically going to say, hey, it calls it states, the state of the data changed, okay? Something's wrong with the data, not wrong, something's changed with the data. So I'm now going to go back and call this render function automatically so that I can capture that change. Isn't that smart? So if the time changes or if the name changes, let's go back to Jenny, React is automatically going to say, hey, something changed, I'm going to re-render. It takes care of that for you. And this is the basic idea of the first core function that we have. It's around tracking the state of data. I will show it to you let's show it to you with this file, okay? Yeah, let's show it to you with this file. So we have to import the special function from React. If you understand imports, then you'll understand the syntax. The special function is called useState. Like use the state of the data so that we can figure out what changes are being made. I'm not going to explain why we have these curly braces. You can search up JavaScript imports later to understand that. But here's how the React part of the function works. So the way we use state is basically, it's almost like you set a variable, except React is going to make a change and track that variable all the time. So React isn't tracking this random like time variable, but it's always going to track this useState variable. So I'm gonna create a variable and it's gonna look a little bit funny. Okay, I'm gonna just call it funny for now, but we're basically gonna use useState and I can put in anything here. So I could put in this is a string. I can put in strings if I want. I can put in numbers. I can put in objects. I can put in any JavaScript data type. So usually we have like often objects. So objects with a property and the value is a string. Usually we have objects and that's like standard JavaScript object format. Hopefully you know that. So there's it's basically like another way of defining a variable, except React is always tracking this variable. Does that part make sense? So if I said var funny equals this variable, this object, then let's say I try to modify the state later. So let's say I said funny equals I can't do this, by the way, but let's say I try to modify the state like this. Funny is equal to property, and now I'm going to put in a number. Now, like JavaScript, now React is going to go, hey, something changed. I was tracking this variable. So this is a special way to define a variable in React. Don't memorize the syntax. That's not good syntax. I called this thing funny. The reason I called it funny is because this isn't actually the name that JavaScript gives the variables. I'm going to demonstrate a quick thing in case you're not familiar with it. This is called array destructuring. So let's say you have a standard array. It's equal to 1, 2. What I can do, if I wanted to make a copy of this, let's say I wanted to get the elements within the array, I could actually do this. Var x, y, var in these square brackets, var x, y equals array. And basically it goes, hey, the first element in the array is x, the second element is y. This is called array destructuring in JavaScript. This is what actually happens with useState. It doesn't return one variable, it returns an array with 2 variables. I'll explain what those 2 variables are. So the 2 variables, I'm going to call them state and set state. So again, it's just like this. It returned an array. It had 2 things in it, and I'm just destructuring the 2 things in the array. Sound good? Anyone have any questions about this syntax? All right, so I'm assuming you're good. So the 2 things that this function returns, the first thing is just the state itself. So let's say a console.log state. You'll see it at the bottom. You'll see, hey, it's just like giving me back whatever I put into state. So this part is actually like, what is the value of state? Again, state as in state of the data. The other thing is a special function that lets me change the state. So if I had like a regular JavaScript variable, like time here, I could be like, okay, time is now actually going to be equal to 1. I can do that if I wanted. I can't do that with React variables, React states. I can't say state is now equal to 1. It's not gonna like that. So the way that you change state, the state of data, is you use the set state function to set, this variable. So set state 2, I could do that. And let me just show you what's happening. So I'm going to console.log state before I set the state to something else. And then I'm going to console.log state again after I set it to something else. Let's see. Oh, oh, here's another. How can I demonstrate this with you? Okay, I'm going to not demonstrate this right now, but here's what you would have expected. So before the state would be property, like this thing, this JavaScript object. Then it would be 2. You can see here that happened. It was property before, then 2. So that's what the state and set state do. They don't have to be called state and set state. That's again a JavaScript convention, like you have time with a capital T. You just call this whatever you want. So let's say this was a username and set username. That's how you call the value. So what the actual data is and the function that's going to change the data. Here, I'll show you again. It could be Jenny, that's the first username, and then I change it, set state to Madhav, that's the second username. So, oh, oops, not set state, set username. Good job if you caught that. So that's how you change states. That's how you mess around with data. And that can let me, like, let's say here, my console.log username, that can let me now do the things that YouTube was doing. I'm going to explain what this means by re-render in just a second. But if you looked at YouTube again, let's say we had a component that was like, okay, this is the video tile. And then inside the video tile, you had different images. So one thing you could have is like, okay, one piece of data I want to track is the URL, the source of the image. And for each component, I'm going to send in different states. I'm going to send in a different URL, and React will automatically track all that data and be like, okay, this one gets in this image, then this image, and this image, and so on. I hope this is making sense. Anyone have any questions about the idea of what state is and what this syntax means before I explain what this error is saying? All right. So we have this as the basic syntax for state. Now, what is this thing? Too many re-renders. Again, remember how whenever the time changed, that's why I used JavaScript. Whenever the time changed, React would refresh the page and show, oh, now there's a new time. Let me change the display. In fact, let me show you again. Oops. Let's change this to name for a second. Let me show you again. The time is this thing. Oh, it re-rendered. It refreshed the page. Those two words mean the same thing, by the way. Re-render, refresh the page. Now the time is something else. Make a change. 1832, 1813, 10. Make a change. 1813, 13. That's what a re-render is called in React. Whenever the data changes, refresh the components, re-render the components so that you can show the data has changed. So what useState does is that's a special thing. I can set time to equal to 2 now, but it won't cause the application to run the same code twice. So it will just show me time is 2. But if I go back to the useState thing, oops, that's not useState. Var state and set state equals useState something. If there is a change in state in this variable that React is specially tracking with its useState function, it will immediately re-render. So let me show you the usefulness of this. Let's say here we wanted to ask people what is their name. So let's have an input component that says, here's the input component, type equals text. So input text here, Madhav, yeah. We can set the value of this component to whatever we have in state. Value equals state. Hey, look, I put the state in here, and now the component is filled because it took the state value and it changed the text to it changed the text in the input. So if I wanted to, I could actually also change the state based on what's already in the function, okay? And this is where you need a special thing, a special property, which is onChange. I'm gonna change the syntax a little bit here, just break it onto multiple lines so it's easier to read. OnChange, what it does is whenever this input field has its value change, then it will call a function that we pass into onChange. Oops, not that function. That's a big function. Let's say we call it like some function. And of course, some function is not defined. So let's define some function. So some function. Oop. and it does something. So something. What happens is whenever the value here changes, the value is the state. Whenever this changes, so this text input changes, it's gonna fire the onChange function. This function right here, we have to tell it which function is gonna fire. And you'll see like it's gonna fire a bunch of somethings now. Something, something, something. You can see this ticker, it went from 12 to something. So whenever I try and type in, it's gonna fire this function. Whenever something changes, it's gonna fire this function. So onChange fires a function. Here's the useful parts. So this function, this is again standard JavaScript. It gets an event property. The event property has an event dot target. Basically, something changed. The change is the event that happened. What is the target of that change? Well, it's this text input. And if we can access that text input, we can also access its value property. Again, event fired. Event is the change. Something happened, something changed. So it called this function and sent it the event that happened. That event, it has a subproperty called the target. The target is this input because that is the thing that changed. And it has a value right here equal to the state. So I could console.log event.target.value if I wanted. Let's actually, yeah. So I could do that if I wanted. So here, look what happens. So I just typed A on my screen. It said something A, and then B on my screen, and then something B. And that's because it just changed the target value, the value of this input. But here's a weird thing. Why is it not, if I just typed in something A, why is it not changing in the input? The reason is we said, okay, just always keep the value of the input to the state. So unless we change the states, then we can't have anything else show up on screen. And that's exactly what we're going to do. That's the point. We're going to set state to event.target.value. Again, the value is just the value of this input field. And now if we type something A, the reason this shows up is because I made a change. I typed in something to the input field, went to the onChange property. It fired some function, this function right here, and the function got an event. The event is, hey, something changed. And it tells us what changed. That's the target. Event.target, hey, what is the target of the thing that changed? And this target happens to be this input element. The input element has a value property, which we can access right here. And now we're just calling setState to change this variable right here. Change this variable right here to whatever's being typed. So whatever is being typed. The reason you can see the change on screen is because of what I said. React re-renders every time there's a change in this state component. Every time. So that if you actually want to see that, I'm going to just console.lag re-render. Okay. So you'll see now, every time something is typed, re-render, 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 every time React is re-rendering everything so that you can see the new stuff that happened. So you can see what changed. This is the hardest thing to understand in React. So if you understood this, this is the hardest part. Good job, you got through it. If not, please tell me, I will explain again. I know this part is hard. It took me like 3 days to understand it, so don't worry if you're lost.
Somebody asked if you were able to explain it again.
Sure. So React has a special, this is the first special function of React, useState, what it does is it tracks the it tracks a variable that we define. So this variable right here, this time variable, it is not being tracked by React. We can change it, however. We can change it just like a JavaScript variable. However, this special function lets us change states, the state of the data in special ways. So before, the state was this string right here, something, and it is saved to this state variable. But we also get this function, setState, just like we have some function here. This is just another function that we can call to change the state. Every time state changes, React is going to re-render. That's why every time I type in here, you can see we have a bunch of re-renders. React is refreshing the page every time we change states. How do we get this, all of this synced up? So here are the key parts. Part 1, define the state variable. Define the special variable that React is going to track. Part 2, oops, I can't leave a comment within HTML. Here's how you actually do that if you want. Remember, these curly braces means we can put JavaScript. So we can actually just put in a standard JavaScript comment like this within these curly braces. So part 2 anyways, special comments. Part 2, we set the value of this input HTML element to the state. So set value of element to state. Part 3 is we created a function that runs every time something changes with this input field. So if we click it, that's a change. If we type into it, that's a change. They're all changes. So part 3, set on change function that is going to be called every time something changes with this input field. And then part 4, we can, oops, no more, now we're in JavaScript land, so regular comments. Now part 4, we can access the value of whatever change through this special notation, event.target.value equals what changed. And we can now set the states. Again, that's the function that changes whatever variable that React is tracking. So once we did that, now the state changes and it re-renders again, so that what we see on screen is a different value for this input. Does that sound good? So you can imagine this is like, oh, you could have a search form, you could have, let me show you a cooler thing. You could have a custom image. So let's say, sorry, I'll show you the custom image after. But does that help answer your question as to what is going on? Key parts, define states, set value of the elements, set an onChange function, and when something changes, set the state to whatever the new things. Does that help? Jenny, are we good?
I haven't gotten a response, but there is another question. Would you be able to share with us a common application or use for this function in React? For example, how would the user interact with it?
Sure. Let me open up some React projects that I've done. I actually did want to end off with this note because I wanted to show you, like, I really do mean it when I say this is the most powerful technology on the internet. So here, this is a website I created where you have like these 4 tiles, just a navigation thing. But each of these tiles, that's just a component. I passed in different states. So let's say I click on blind drawings. This one's a bit complicated, but essentially I created like a drawing canvas where what's on the canvas is part of state. So every time I click, there's an onChange function firing, and it says, hey, there's a pixel here now, there's a pixel here now, or the color he selected, it's this one now. And those are all pieces of data represented by states. Let me show you like less games, but more professional software. So here, this is a forum that I created for people to post like sustainability ideas online. It might take a bit to load. Oh, there we are. So each of these things, each of these posts, so it has an author, it has a date, it has a summary. All of these are part of states. If I say want to filter by something, then there's a filter that says use state, set, like here's a filter, set filter, and I can apply this filter now, and it's going to search for ideas in just retail. I could have a piece of state that has search data. So this is just like the form input that we just coded. So that's tracking search data, and it's like, okay, search for some cooking ideas. So I could search for this, and the input is just stored by states. Let's try to remove that filter. Okay, clothes. So you can see that was something that got stored to state, then it filtered through the data. Each of these individual posts is in a state. So that would be like a JavaScript object. That's why like you could have something like title of the post is something, date of the post is another thing. And that's actually what's going on. We're not coding any of these. It's the same with the YouTube. I'm not coding any of these individual tiles. They're all states. And that's a little bit of the use case behind this. Does that help?
Yep, that helps.
All right.
Someone else asked, did you use multiple APIs for the drawing application?
No, actually, I didn't use any APIs. I just used dependencies. So just like you can import React, you can also import other things. Anything you ever want to import, go to npm JS. npm JS, npm is like Node Package Manager, which just means like it manages JavaScript packages, libraries. So you can import React, which is what's letting us do all of this. But you can also import what I use, so React Canvas, which is actually just a component. So someone made a component, just like time. You can import it and just use it. So you can import it and just in app.js, you could just put in like, say, drawing component that you would have imported from somewhere. So right now we don't have a drawing component. But that's another piece of the power behind React. You can have reusable components like this. Does that sound good? Does that help? Let me show you this component. Here. So you can import this component just like you would import any other components. And in the render method somewhere you would have like, okay, just return that component. npm JS, very useful sites.
And just a final question. Someone asked for your email or other contact information.
Sure. So I know we're a little bit short on time with this workshop again. React is hard, but I really do think you're in good shape to basically do almost anything you wanted. There's one thing we didn't get to cover. So the first thing, we have this Hackpack template. I'll put in the link right here because it has resources on how to get through the rest of the stuff that well, the one last function we didn't cover. So If I scroll down to the bottom, you see these resources. So this one, biggest thing, that's where I learned everything, but it's a bit long. So you can actually just go to this NetNinja series, and I'll leave a note here. The one thing that we didn't cover, equals a function called useEffect. Just like useState, it's the other big function in React, the only other big function in React. And with that, 90% of the things you want to do, you can do. Just like I showed, whether that be like a drawing game or whether that be like a professional piece of software like I showed, or whether that be YouTube. So that's a one note that I'll leave you. So those two resources are right there. If you want to reach out to me in particular, I have my website right here. You can contact me via that. And I really do think, like, if you follow up with this, I know it's a little bit hard, but as soon as you learn this, like, these are basically job-ready skills. Once you know React, you can do anything, like literally anything. It's the biggest level up that any web developer could have.
So if there aren't any other questions, that will be the end of the workshop today. Thank you so much to Manav for conducting this workshop and providing your insight and resources to all of our participants. And if you guys want, you can go check out the Intro to Computer Vision workshop that's happening right now. So thanks for coming.